Good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm going to be doing a quick video on my editing workflow. So this is a workflow which I've really sort of developed over the years of editing. So today's video is all going to be structured around that. Now the footage itself, I just went out very quickly and briefly for about a couple of hours and I filmed all around Lakeside in Doncaster. So I'm going to jump straight into Premiere Pro and we're going to talk a little bit about it. So Premiere Pro, the reason I've stuck to this is because we use it most at the college. But like I said a second ago, this can be applied to most things. I'm just going to jump over to the editing page as well so we get a bit more space. Okay, so to kickstart things off, on the left-hand side here, you can see I've got all of my bins in order. I really drill home a lot the reason and the necessity for creating bins. It's really good housekeeping, and for this project, and if you're doing a smaller project, sometimes creating bins can feel a little bit over the top because the footage you have, you might not have many clips, etc. So there's definitely a time and a place when you can get away with it, but for most projects, and even for this 1 minute 10-second project I've got here, these bins really helped out. So I've got my adjustment layers, which you can see here on my timeline. I've got my footage, music, sound effects, and sound design bin, sequences bin. I could have had more bins, I could have had less bins, but this is how many I've got for this project. And I'll talk about what I could have had later on. Now, just another sort of sideline, I love to see my project space listed instead of tabbed. So this is what it looks like as a tab view. And, I just find this space so limiting. I like to see, I can see these 4 bins here and exactly what they are. I'm really not a fan of this viewer, but some people are. And again, if you can always make these full screen by hitting the tilde key, so you can sort of full screen it. But again, I just prefer to have my area like this. So staying in this view, we're going to double click on the footage, and you can see I've got all my footage from the day here and all the metadata and video info to the right hand side of it. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I could have done differently here, and talk to you about some of these color codes and things like that, and why I've color coded, because I love color coding. I find it really helpful and it speeds up the process so much more. So what I always say to begin with is spend a bit of time, guys, reviewing your footage and renaming it. So this clip here, without looking at it like this, and by the way, it's jumped over to here, in list view, renaming the footage means that I can stay in this view and I know that this clip is going to be of the bench. I don't have a clue what this clip is, I don't have a clue what this clip is, and the only way to really know what these clips would be is if I went into this icon view. Good practice dictates, always watch your footage, review it, rename it. Put it into a bin in its own right, if it's A-roll, B-roll, if it's for the, if it's footage you're not going to use, say it's too shaky or it cuts off halfway through. It's always good to rename your footage and start knowing what it looks like before you jump into the editing process. That is good practice. It's good housekeeping. The thing I do extra, the reason I haven't done it, let me talk about that first. So you'll notice I renamed bench, and then I must have got bored because I haven't done it to any other single clip. And it isn't because I got bored. I can tell you exactly why I didn't rename my clips. And I can also tell you now I've finished editing, I wish I had renamed my clips, and I'll sort of talk a bit more now. So ultimately, I didn't rename my clips because I filmed sequentially, which means I filmed in order, and I filmed all on the same day within a 2-hour window. So the reason I haven't named my footage is because I didn't really want to spend that much time on this project, but now I've finished editing and you can see some of these clips down here. I wish I had renamed some of the footage. And this clip in particular, 114, this is a shot that I use way further down. This is the shot here. So had I renamed this footage, as B-roll. I know the whole sequence is B-roll because there's no story, but my A-roll for this short demo was kind of like the journey from where I begin and my way around Lakeside. And the B-roll in this film is kind of the cutaways to sort of wildlife or foliage, etc., which I'll talk about in a little bit. Had I have renamed this track later on, I wouldn't have had to have scrolled for all this footage, double clicking, trying to find this specific clip that is nestled between A-roll shots like this and this. The next thing I want to talk about is sequences. So this is where I have very much followed something that I always say. Double clicking on this first sequence, my first sequence is always the rough cut. This is kind of like if you imagine an artist does a sketch, okay? So I very much treat the rough cut like it's just about getting your pace ready. It's just about getting everything that you filmed that's good, that tells a story, into a sequence. I just concentrate on the pace. Does it tell the story? Does it tell the story short enough, long enough, etc., for it to do the job? So my rough cut is always the first grounds. You'll notice in my rough cut as well, I've color coded things. So the way that I edit, I have a very systematic color scheme. So I always have this kind of lavender or light pink, whatever you want to call it, as my effects and titles and credits. So just visually looking at this timeline, I don't need to zoom in, to see it. I can sort of see it visually. And that's why I love color coding. I always have Mango as my start and end shots. I typically leave the shots which are fine as the blue, the natural blue look, and rose or red, which you can see by these three here and these two here, are the shots which are going to have an effect over the top of them. For these three shots here, I did, knowing what I wanted to do in post before filming, I knew that this is the kind of effect I wanted to add to it, so I was able to kind of have a play with those three shots. Played with different focal ranges. I didn't change lens, I didn't zoom in or anything like that on the day. All of the zoom in effects are done in post. Each shot is essentially just me going from left to right without a track. So again, I could have stabilized it, but I didn't feel I needed to. Any shots that you see which are green are the B-roll. Now I know you're thinking, well, the whole scene is B-roll because it doesn't have a narrative or a story, but the story and narrative to this short clip was essentially my journey around Lakeside. And I've also moved them up on my timeline. So really the thing I like to do is take advantage of my video tracks, and this isn't uncommon in feature films. You'll see that have hundreds of video tracks, and again, this serves a purpose both logistically and creatively. So just having these above the main sequence again means that if I need to focus on them, that I'm not having to click through things to find them, nor am I sort of relying even at this stage on the color codes because I can see they're above everything else. But again, color coding them just helps out significantly. And while we're all here, that's just right clicking and then finding it out of the colors. So that is basically my rough cut explained. So once I did my rough cut, I right clicked my timeline, duplicated the track and focused on the color correction. So color correction, different to color grading, is just getting all of these scenes which you can see here, which are all sometimes filmed at different lighting conditions and at different times of the morning. It's all about getting them to the same exposure, contrast, color, etc. So it's balancing the whole scene out so that nothing looks, other than these couple of shots. Where were they? I just saw them a second ago. These two here were quite challenging. You can tell that these were filmed later than these shots at the beginning of the day. That's for sure. So color correction is all about correcting those highlights, those exposure issues, and just getting everything in the sequence looking balanced. So that was the color correction tab. Now, how it changes for the color grade tab, you can see here it changes quite a lot. Where have all those tracks gone? So essentially what I've done here is I've nested a sequence. So nesting in Premiere Pro is basically where you drag, say for example this timeline, the color correction timeline, you drag it onto this new layer icon, which is here. And what that creates is a nested sequence. So a nested sequence essentially is within this green that you can see here, this green timeline, which is all one, basically within this is everything out of this tab. It's non-destructive, so whatever I add to this will not affect these clips, it will only affect these clips here. So why did I do that instead of duplicating it? Really just because it gets rid of all of those tracks that you've just seen and all that colour variation, all of the things that I did earlier with reasons why. I don't need them for the grade. For the grade, I'm just worried about the overall look, the style. So that's the reason why I nest it. Now the one track that I haven't got, which again I would argue is again good practice, or what I think is good practice, which is to do a final master sequence. Now this would be a master of your audio and your colour grade and everything essentially. So from this particular sequence, I would then have my master sequence, which would be, as you can see here with all of these, they all go through a step-by-step progression. So the final master sequences would be fully rendered and would be ready to be exported essentially, would be the master sequence. The other reason I like this method a lot is if you pass on your editing to somebody else to finish, they can see exactly what you've been doing and what you've been up to. So again, having all these different sequences, if you're working in teams or sharing your projects with other editors, can really kind of help out as well, especially if you're all working to the same guidelines. So that has been a hopefully insightful video on how I edit and the workflow I use to edit, and should help out with your editing. So hopefully you've taken something away from today's video, and yeah, I'll see you all soon.